Hello, everyone. I'm Aaron,
And I'm Wade.
and we're the Lorcana Twins, and we're deep in set championship season right now. And in our last video, we covered our first weekend of set championships. So if you missed that, feel free to check it out. But today, we're going to get into this previous weekend, or our second weekend of set championships for Shimmering Skies. So we'll get into how that went. So I took Emerald Steel again. I played it one time last week, and I thought I left a little on the table there. And it's not typically my kind of deck. I haven't played too much of discard decks in the past, but it actually seemed a lot of fun to play. Maybe not so fun to play against, but I think what really appealed to me, besides the fact that a deck like this had recently had so much success in Vegas, was just some of the characters and the cards that make up the deck. Like, always been a huge Hercules fan, and the Muses here seems like a really cool card that actually can be pretty effective in certain situations. And then the Tragic Hero Beast, Diablo, a lot of these cards that were pretty pricey when they first came out, and I opened some in packs and had to buy some as well, but for a long time I really hadn't gotten a ton of use out of them, so here was a deck that got to use a lot of them all in one, so it looked like a lot of fun. And then one of my favorite characters is Morph here. And so now with the addition of Morph to these Emerald Steel decks, I think it adds a nice surprise element and just a different lines you can go for. So I decided to bring this again, and overall it went amazingly, I would say, and I was able to finally get a playmat at one of these events and went on to win the whole thing. So it was a lot of fun. And yeah, it's pretty stock standard. It's just one card different from Zan's list. I played his exact list, the Vegas winning list, the previous weekend, and I decided just to take out one Hypnotize to add in one extra Tinkerbell, because I thought there might be a lot of aggro decks kind of at our local meta. And but yeah, it played very consistently and had some good matches. I think I started against a mirror match, actually. We were the only two that had brought it. And we went to game three. It was kind of whoever could get their draw engine running seemed to come out on top in those. The second match, I paired up against a Ruby Sapphire. And that one, I was able to discard their hand down in one of the games, but the other two games they got over the top of me. So started 1-1, and then I moved on to a Steel Amethyst deck, was able to 2-0 there, and then moved on to face an Amber Steel deck and was able to 2-0 there. And then I got paired against my brother, but we decided to draw since we both make top 8 that way. And even if we had lost, we would have both still made the top 8, but we just decided to, put off any future battle until later. And then in the top 8...
It was also a nice day, so we thought we'd
Yeah.
go out and get a little sun.
Yep, and so then in the top 8, I played against a Blurple deck and was able to 2-0 there. I think the ward characters in this deck just are really hard for them to deal with, plus the discarding. And then in the top 4, we actually got to meet, and I would say...
I felt like I couldn't play the game, so...
I guess my deck was really popping off that time. You were on, well, we'll see what you were on soon enough, but... Then for the final, I had a rematch against the Ruby Sapphire player, great player, and game 1, I didn't do much. I probably got to 7 lore maybe, and looked at my hand. I was out of cards. I'm playing the discard deck, but I didn't have any, and my opponent still had like 5 cards and a better board than me, so that was, pretty laughable on my end. But then games 2 and 3, I think I really popped off and found all the discard cards and found a way to protect Diablo with a Cove for a couple turns, and then just it kind of ran away from there. And then game 3, they kind of bricked really hard and had a lot of uninkables and kind of got stuck on 3 ink, which when you're on Ruby Sapphire, it's not what you're hoping to do. So was able to get it in the end, but overall very fun day, fun event, and just another good experience on this deck. I think from playing it, I learned a lot about like what it's trying to do and the different lines you can take. I mean, I always like to try to shift Diablo on turn 2 if you could, or even on turn 3 on top of a Morph if you missed your little Diablo. And just the ability to play, a shift Diablo on 3 and play a 3-drop in addition to it, like maybe a Pete to protect Diablo from actions, maybe an Ursula to set up a double song on the next turn. Just presenting like a couple threats at the same time, and the opponent has to decide which, if any, they can deal with. So a lot of explosive early game potential with this deck, and it was fun to play. But I think now, after having this experience with it, I will probably switch to something else, and I did for the next one, which you'll see later. But now let's see what
You're
you
gonna
played.
stop terrorizing the locals with this?
I don't know.
It certainly can be a nasty deck.
There's so many top tier players here in the area that if you don't bring a strong deck, it might be a challenge to get some wins. But yeah, I think there's a lot of viable decks in this set, and that's what I found really cool too. Like a lot of these set championships, I've seen maybe 6 or more different decks making the top 8. So very cool to see the diversity that's potential out there. But let's see what you played.
Well, I was told that we might see a lot of aggro decks at our locals for this particular tournament, so I was going to play a different deck for this one, but then I switched to Amber Steel at kind of the last moment. So this deck is basically identical to what I played last weekend that I was able to get first with that weekend, but the only card I changed, I swapped out my 1 copy of Bare Necessities for 1 copy of World's Greatest Criminal Mind. And I had heard there were also maybe going to be a couple of blue-red decks there, and I figured like it'd be a good answer to Tamatoa specifically. And then, also I think our area, there's some other Amber Steel players too, and I thought, it'd be a good answer for Cinderella. So I had used the Bare Necessities the previous weekend, and over quite a few matches, only really got good use out of it one time. So figured it wouldn't hurt to try a different one. But yeah, the World's Greatest Criminal Mind, it never really came up in any of the matches I was in. There was a time I did want it for a Tamatoa, but I ended up not needing it to get across the finish line. So I started my first 4 rounds. I was undefeated. I was 4-0. I started against a Hyper Aggro Amber Emerald deck, and so I was able to 2-0 that. And then I moved on to an Amethyst Steel and also got a 2-0 there. Then I had a really close match against Ruby Amethyst. We went to 3 games and we went to turns, but I was able to get it 2-1 before the time ran out there.
I saw you had dropped a Pete right before they tapped deck Be Prepared, which
I actually had back-to-back Petes in that game at a clutch moment, and I had a big Cinderella in play as well at one point, so she was helping me get some lore there towards the end. And then for round 4, I played against the Sapphire Ruby deck, and due to just the way it played out, I did have quite a few like whole new worlds into Pete's, and the stats of my characters were just enough to get above some Sisus. So I was able to 2-0 the Ruby Sapphire, but great player, and it was very long, drawn out, grindy matches, but had a lot of fun with that. Then, as my brother said, I got matched into him for round 5, and we just decided to draw. Figured we might see each other later. I kind of hoped I wouldn't until maybe the finals, because I knew we had practiced a little bit before. I was on Amber Steel into Emerald Steel, and I think it went 1 and 2, but just all the ward characters that deck has, all your single target removal doesn't work against them, and I don't actually have any grab your swords in this particular build. So Prince John is pretty safe, and Diablos, you really need single target removal for him.
It helped that I knew you didn't have those swords as well.
And then Ursula, she always tends to come down and mess up your plans in the early game. So I tried to mulligan away songs and just go with the character approach and hope to draw into songs off aerials and things like that and be able to play them. And I know in one game I played Pete 3 turns in a row, just kind of hoping I would draw into a 3-cost song that I could sing with one of my other Petes and get rid of your Diablos. But you very quickly had 2 Diablos going.
That was from pretty nasty.
Turn 1 and 2, and the resource advantage from that was just pretty hard to overcome. So I did not overcome it. And then game 2, I think you had just an absolute crazy start.
I think the best turn, I was able to set up the Ursula 3-drop, and then I played the Muses, and then was able to double sing Let the Storm Rage On to clear off 2 of your characters, and then have the Muses bounce your other 2. So I
went from having 4 characters in play to having 0, and from there it was just pretty impossible to come back from. So I would say every game before that felt pretty fun, and I was able to use my cards and really plan things out. But against Emerald Steel, sometimes it just feels like there's nothing you can do. And
it was interesting for me to see too, because going into that, I was kind of worried about that matchup, just thinking if you get a lot of your singers down and remove all my stuff, that I'd just have no momentum. But it was good to see that, it is possible for the Emerald Steel to win as well, and it might be close to 50-50 or somewhere in there as far as the matchup can go. But Yeah, I think there's
It sure
options for
felt
both
to me like
decks.
Emerald Steel's a little favored in that matchup, but I
I think
can.
the green Ursula helps, and I guess both decks play Pete. So, yeah, in the first game when you Peated 3 turns in a row, like at first I was feeling pretty good because I had a good board established that was ready to start singing songs. But then I had all 4 cards in my hand were actions. So yeah, that really stalled me out. I worried that you were gonna swing the board back in your favor, but it ended up working out for me in the end.
It helped that the Diablos kept drawing through those turns as well, and
But still,
giving you
another
more
top 4
options.
finish.
But
That
yes,
was very good.
so I finished in third there, and it was a pretty fun event, I will say. So I really enjoyed this deck. I think it's just fun playing down a lot of quick characters and removing things with songs and trying to keep the flow going with Naveen, Whole New World, and Ariel and things like that.
For sure. So then we went to a different set championship the next day, and we decided to mix it up, try some decks that we hadn't maybe played as much or in a tournament setting yet. So I ran it with Emerald Amethyst here, and this was a direct copy of Patrick from the Lorcana duo. He had taken this list to a set championship and gotten first place with it. And I thought, I would just start with a good base here and trust in his deck building since I hadn't been playing too much of this recently. And yeah, I really liked the list. I think it was fun having 8 1-drops. I usually felt like I could find one for turn 1. I really enjoyed the Evasive Pegasus because, a lot of certain characters you feel like you maybe can't quest them depending on what your opponent has on board. But usually this Pegasus is just, a free lore every turn if they didn't have an evasive way to deal with it. And then the Snake, of course, is in a lot of Amethyst decks. Very good stat line. I also like the Bonsai being a 3/2. Takes out a lot of, characters at that cost level, especially in like Ruby Amethyst, for example. And having the 2 lore, too. Now, I liked how there were just a couple because it is uninkable, and sometimes you might not want to run it out. Like maybe your opponent has a singer in play that could easily deal 2 damage to him, and maybe you'd rather run out something else, but then you can't really ink him. So I like the flexibility there, just having a couple. And then Mother Gothel, she came in pretty big a couple of times. Like one of my opponents had down the 7-cost Cinderella, which damage-wise this deck can struggle to deal with if you don't have like a Merlin Crab to buff a Madam M Fox, for example. But this Mother Gothel just paying 5 to bounce something that had cost them 7 to play, that felt pretty efficient and very tempo-oriented for me, which is what this deck's trying to do. I think the Emerald Ursula, of course, to steal songs is just huge in this meta right now. There's a lot of decks running a lot of important songs, and gives you a chance kind of to protect some of your weaker characters as well against like steal damage and brawls and things like that. And of course your Amethyst, your Fox, and your Crab, your Goats and your Rabbits is very important staples. I think Kit here in the 3-drop, very fun card to play. I know there's some matchups where their characters are a little more burly and don't really get bounced much, or sometimes they're characters you don't want to bounce. But I think in certain matchups it can be pretty big, like maybe to bounce back a Hiram if you want to make them need to repay, 4 ink to get that back down. They still get to draw again, which is a little unfortunate, but just buys you more time. I think the biggest time that it was helpful to me was against a Diablo that someone had down, because I ended up facing 2 Emerald Steels throughout the day, and yeah, it's great for bouncing Diablos. Sometimes I bounced a Lyle, and then in one matchup I was against Mufasa, and they had the Gaston down that lets you play something for 2 less when it exerts, but that's a 2/4. So Kit was able to bounce that, and that was a really big, tempo swing for me. And then Lyle, of course, is very good at stalling your opponent out, kind of making them lose lore while you continue to gain it, and it just buys you a nice lore lead that helps you get to the finish line before them. And then Elsa has been a very good card from this new set. I think, this deck doesn't have a ton of direct removal except maybe the You're Welcome. So it's nice to be able to exert something and then kind of force the issue. And if you've set up a good board of characters, you can get some trades that they were maybe hoping that you wouldn't be able to get, by leaving their characters ready. So that's great. And then I think the Pegasus, 2 lore evasive quester, felt nice to have. I know one game I was able to see with the Ursula that they were going to have a brawl on 3, and since I was on the play, I was able to shift my Pegasus then right before they'd be able to brawl it. in case they wanted to, and then just continue to quest them out for 2 lore every turn until they got to 16 and could Medusa it. So that was a lot of good lore there. And then I think a couple of the linchpins of the deck would be the 7-cost Ursula, which definitely carried a lot of weight for me in the day. Just being able to shift it on top of the 5, and all of a sudden your opponent's characters, they can't sing songs, and neither can your other ones, but there's not too many songs in here. But yeah, just also really importantly, the ability to quest for 3 and then at the same time exert an opponent's character, so you can again set up a favorable challenge or remove a problem character they have. Again, that's very great tempo. And then Clarabelle, one of the new staples as well, just being able to refill your hand when you're low. It's easy to, at a certain point, try to ink yourself down, spam out some cheaper characters, and if you've got the 1-drop Clarabelle in play, for the low cost of 5, you can just shift up into this one, and then you have a 5/6, a quest for 2, and sometimes you want to leave her ready so they can't challenge her if you want to get multiple turns of draw out of her, but just a lot of value. And then friends on the other side to draw, you're welcome. If you have to remove just a big problem character, I know one time I used that on the 7-cost Cinderella, because that resists it, and 3 lore is pretty scary. And then sometimes you could even sing it with your own rabbit on itself and draw 3. So it's flexible that way, where if you want some draw, you can use it for yourself, and if you need to remove something to the opponents, you can do that as well. And then again, I think from playing the Emerald Steel deck, I really came to appreciate the Hidden Cove card, just being able to get surprise trades by buffing your characters or protecting them from certain key removal pieces. So also there was 2 in this list, and I appreciated that. And then 1 copy of the Library, which is a very high willpower location that can kind of make your opponent wonder how they're going to remove that, but also the characters you put there and in which order to do that, because if they remove the characters, you're going to be drawing cards. But if they spend time sinking 8 damage into the location, your characters get to quest longer. So it just poses a challenge to them and is an alternate draw engine. So overall, a lot of fun on this list, and I was able to go 3-2 on the day, and with that I was able to make the top 8, and I ended up taking on a couple Emerald Steels, and I was surprised I was able to beat one, and then I lost 1-2 to the other, and then I was able to get 2 games against an Amber Steel as well, and then Ruby Amethyst, which I think was favorable for me, was a 2-0. And then there was one other match that I had also won. But then I lost to a Mufasa deck, and that was quite a challenge. I really liked that Mufasa deck, so props to them. But yeah, in the top 8, I actually faced the only other Emerald Amethyst deck that had been registered at the event, and we went to game 3, and they got me there. So, but yeah, overall, it was a lot of fun to play. And now
I really loved playing Emerald Amethyst in Vegas. Probably one of the most fun decks I think that I've played this format. But yeah, it's good to see that you've had success on this.
And what did you play?
Well, I decided to play Sapphire Amethyst for this one, and I've got 2 wins and 0 losses and 3 draws, so I was really having a hard time finishing, we actually even starting a 3rd game. Every draw that I had, my opponent and I didn't have time to even start game 3, so It definitely felt like more of a kind of a grindy, slow burn type of deck, where, if you can take over the board, then you can start questing a lot, but when you're against other Amethyst decks and you're all bouncing rabbits and, just doing a lot of card draw and answering each other's characters, you just kind of are slowly inching your way to 20, so I felt like with maybe the time that we had in each round, and I would just need to make sure that I'm playing super efficiently and hoping that my opponent is as well, because finishing 3 games in 50 minutes, it felt like that would be kind of a big ask for this deck sometimes when it can get kind of grindy. But I really did enjoy the list. I thought it was super fun to play because you get a little bit of the Sapphire ramp mixed in with the purple bounce packages, which I'm a huge fan of Amethyst. Always have really kind of gravitated towards that playstyle. So in this particular list, I decided to play 4 of the Chernobog's followers and 3 Broom. And then I put 1 Cogsworth in there just to kind of mix it up. I know like the Brooms and the Chernobyls work really well with the library, how you can banish them when they're there and then draw 2 cards. But Cogsworth is kind of interesting too, because if you had to, you could rush him in and he could, trade while he's on the library as well and get an immediate card. So he kind of can do a similar thing to the Broom, but then he gives you the option of giving a better stated character rush on a turn, and that can help you kind of fight for the board. Especially, usually start a little bit behind on board if you're taking a turn to like ramp with Tipo. Like your stats aren't great until you start to hit the 3, 4, or 5 cost cards. So. So there's interesting things to consider there. I like the Mickey Mouse, the Sapphire Mickey as well, because with so much discard being played right now due to the popularity of Emerald Steel, I like ramping from the top of your deck instead of from your hand. So Tipo's great because you can get a turn 3 rabbit out, which is kind of my favorite thing to do with that. But sometimes if you're against the discard decks, I'd probably rather maintain my hand size and try to ramp up another way. And so that 5 cost Donald Duck, the Sapphire one, also does the same thing that Mickey does. So that's nice too. He can help you get from 5 to 7 ink on your next turn, and then suddenly you're able to play Hades if you need to do that. I played 4 Hades in the deck, and there were a couple matchups where I really think I would have possibly had a 2-0 instead of a 1-1 draw if I had just seen some of my Hades, but even playing 4, they were like all at the bottom, so I was kind of disappointed about that. But and then for the other Sapphire card in the deck, I was playing 1 copy of Mufasa. Just thought that would be an interesting way to kind of get some resources back to your hand later in the game, and then if he's not answered by the opponent, it can be really strong, just kind of playing out all of your ink, questing for 4, and then playing out all of your ink again. So
Great way to close the game.
Yes, I think that's something he can do pretty well. And then as far as the Amethyst cards, most of it is typically what you see in a Amethyst Emerald or an Amethyst Ruby style of deck with the goats and the rabbits, snakes, foxes, and crabs, and
I really like the Bell card.
But yeah, in this deck, I think you have less like direct removal. So Ruby of course would be like brawling and playing Medusa and Tremaine. Once you get up to those types of ink levels, but in this deck you kind of have to force trades with Elsa at the 5 cost. And then also Belle is nice because maybe after you've used Elsa to make a trade, she might have 2 or 3 damage on her, and on the next turn if she's still around, you can move some of that with Belle. And so I think that sometimes that surprises people, and you can do some fun tricks with that. And she can be bounced back to hand too and replayed later, and she quests well, and her stat line of 4/4 is kind of hard for some decks to remove. And then Yzma, she's interesting. Sometimes you need to use her on the opponent's characters if you're in a bad spot, but if you can put yourself into a good position, then you can use her on your own characters just to kind of draw cards and keep your resources up. And then Cusco, I think this card I played generally just for the threat of the Ruby Sapphire decks, if they are having a dime out primarily, or if you find yourself in a position where you can't remove a location, he can be really efficient to just play him and remove that. He didn't come in super handy just based on the matchups I was in. I didn't play any Ruby Sapphires that day, and I did play against a Ruby Amethyst that was kind of location heavy, but I never actually drew Cusco in that matchup, so I would have liked to see him in one of those games. And then one of my favorite cards in the deck is for sure the 8 cost Elsa, Spirit of Winter from the first chapter. It just always feels nice freezing 2 of your opponent's characters and making it so they can't ready on the next turn. And in a deck like this where you do tend to ramp up to pretty high ink totals, you can bounce her back and play her again after you've quested for 3, once you have 10 ink with a snake or 11 ink with a fox. And it's just, it's cool, like all of the replayability you can get out of some of your on play effects, and Hades is kind of the same way with that. You can bounce your Hades back later and keep putting cards into their inkwell, and at a certain point, depending on what deck they're playing, they just may not be able to answer the board presence that you're building. So I found the deck to be a lot of fun. I just wish I had a little more time in the rounds to kind of see how the games that I drew, like see if I could have turned those into some match wins or not. And my matchups for the day, I started against Amber Steel. And I was on the draw for that, and luckily my opponent's hand just kind of bricked up in the first game, so I was able to kind of fight for the board once I had ramped a bit, and then kind of hold them off. I think I had 2 back-to-back Elsas and a Hades in there, so that felt pretty satisfying. And then in game 2 on the draw, I just got absolutely destroyed by the types of tricks that Amber Steel does. But game 3, it felt nice being on the play, and I was able to ramp faster and kind of deal with their singers. And then my second matchup was a really interesting Sapphire Steel deck. I'd like to see the list eventually because it looked like a lot of fun. They were ramping really fast with How Far I'll Go and Tipo, and they weren't playing any items, so they ended up playing like the big Maui from set 1 and the John Silver, the Sapphire one. And so they had 8 cost characters, and then those were able to sing dig a little deeper so they could find the cards they wanted. They were also playing the big Cinderella, Stout-Hearted 7-drop, and so they had a lot of big, powerful cards.
It's a unique take on Sapphire Steel.
It was. I was just barely able to get them in game 1. They could get to 19, but I snuck past, and then in game 2, I really needed to find some Hades, and I just couldn't, and they used 2 Hades on me in a row, so that kind of set me back. And then we didn't have time to go to game 3. My third match, I was against Emerald Steel, and it's just my least favorite deck to play against, and I don't blame anyone for using it right now because it's very strong. But personally, like, I just tend to have a lot less fun when I'm against that. So, but I was able to. I got to like 19 in game 1, and they just had every perfect removal for what I had going on. And then in game 2, I was able to just barely get there before they could stop me. So we split that one too, and then went to time. And then my fourth match of the day, I was against the Hyper Aggro Amber Amethyst. And my opponent seemed to be playing very well. They got to like 16 and 17, but I found a lot of my early game in both of those matches and was able to just quickly get to my Elsas and kind of keep them from questing anymore in the later stages of the game. And that was the first round that actually went really fast for me, so I was happy to have a break from some of the long, grindier matches. And then for the final round, I had to win. I had to win the match to make top 8, as it turned out. And I won the first game on the draw against Ruby Amethyst. And then on the second game, I just couldn't quite hold them back. They had a pretty good curve of C-suit after Flynn and then into Castle, and I think they also had a library, and it was just a lot going on to try to deal with stat-wise, and I couldn't quite hold it off. And then we didn't have time to start a third game, so I ended with 9 points, which 2 people with 9 points made top 8, and I finished in 9th just based on tiebreakers. So I really just kind of wanted to make it in so I could have some more reps on this deck. It was a lot of fun to put together, though, and I enjoyed this kind of style of play. And I guess if I try it again, I'll just try to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to play as fast as I can while still making good decisions, because I think it is a slower deck in general, and so depending on how much time you have in each round, it may not be the best choice, but I think it's fun and it could go far.
Well, and that takes us to the end of our recap there, but we have one more set championship planned for next weekend, and then we might take a break. That might be the last one we do this time around. So yeah, we're still kind of deciding what to play for that, but I will probably switch it up again and try something I haven't tried yet. Again, not sure what that's going to be, but it's been cool to look at other set champ winning or Mirabelle winning lists just all over the country and the globe, and seeing what other things people have been cooking up that maybe aren't like the most obvious meta decks. So maybe we'll try something like that.
Really unique lists out there. So,
but I'm sure whatever we do, we will report on that next week. But now we just wanted to touch on a few cards from the upcoming set that are worth talking about. So kick it off here with Fred, Mascot by Day.
Well, Fred is a 1-cost inkable emerald. character here with 1 strength and 1 willpower stat line and 1 lore. And his ability, how cool is that? Whenever this character is challenged, gain 2 lore. So I think this is really interesting, potentially for some hyper-aggressive Emerald decks. I know right now this might go well in Emerald Amber, which seems to be getting quite popular. And just the idea that, if your opponent isn't playing, action-based or effect-based removal, like if their deck needs to challenge in the early stages of the game to remove something, they might not want to, because then this effectively, once it quests and makes itself vulnerable for a challenge, if you take it out, they've already gotten 3 lore off of this 1-cost card. And that's really efficient lore gain. So I think just that right there is, and if they feel like they need to leave it up, then you're just questing for 1 every turn, just kind of steadily, and the threat of that.
So it'll kind of depend on if the clock from that is fast enough to make them really need to challenge in and just say, oh, I'll take the 2 lore hit, but then hopefully I can kind of stabilize, or if they'll just somehow be able to let it sit there. Again, if they're in steel, they can just maybe fire the cannons on it, or play a big Tinkerbell Giant Fairy or something like that. But
and Ruby could brawl this, or play the 3-cost.
But if Ruby brawls a 1-drop, you're probably feeling pretty good about it. So
yeah.
it seems like a threatening card. It'll be interesting to see how much success it does have.
Yeah, I think this could also fit really nice in Emerald Amethyst as well. And plus, if people aren't removing this, then maybe you could always play a crab on it if you had to make a trade. Like maybe they're just ignoring it. Of course, ideally you want this to be banished in a challenge, so that that you're at least getting 2 lore. And it doesn't even have to be banished, for you to get the lore. So I doubt this will happen much. But if an opponent had like a 0 strength Merfolk and maybe you were able to give it Reckless, the Merfolk may have to swing in here, and you're getting the 2 lore even though he's not banished, because it just says when it's challenged. So
that does sound very unlikely, but if it ever happened like that would be pretty optimal for you. But yeah, I think an interesting card, and from Big Hero 6, which is a new franchise making its way into set 6. So that is cool to see. And next we have Tigger in the Crow's Nest. And he's a 3-cost inkable character, 0 strength and 4 willpower. He's got evasive, so he's very slippery in that way. And then he has an ability, Swash Your Buckles. Whenever you play an action, this character gets +1 strength and +1 lore this turn. And he has a base lore of 1 already. So this is an interesting card. Definitely doesn't seem like, on the face value, like you'd want to be doing too much challenging with this, but there is the potential for it. If you've played a lot of actions, it will gain more strength. And then I think the ability to just quest evasively, that's definitely been good in the past. The 0 stat line does leave it susceptible to things like Brawl and the Human Sisu 3-drop, but I do think there's a lot of potential here for maybe a Ruby Emerald evasive deck, or something that cares about actions. I know we've seen in previous sets like cards that are kind of hinting at that, but a deck really hasn't come fully into fruition yet. But maybe this is a step in that right direction, and just the ability to, let's say you've played 3 actions in a turn, he's questing for 3, or he's got 3 strength. Probably want to be questing in that scenario, but
I think it definitely needs to go in a deck that plays a lot of actions. Otherwise, you might just play Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer in this spot because she costs the same thing and already has that 2 lore. So unless you're playing like 2 actions in a turn, then Minnie's already questing for at least 2 lore. So
he does have 1 extra willpower, or of health or whatever, and so that'll help him survive. Maybe a little more than Minnie, who could be banished to a smash or something, and
he has the potential to hit harder as well if his strength is getting boosted, so maybe he can remove other evasive units if you're playing enough actions in a turn. So
I think the more cards that come out, like, it's just interesting to see there are a lot of choices there. Like, you could run the Mini, who's already 2, or maybe you think you'll get more value out of this Tigger. But yeah, I mean, if you have a deck, I think even in our last episode we touched on a new Stitch card that's coming out, that when you shift him, you can return an action from your discard to the top of your deck. So, again, in potentially an Emerald Ruby deck, maybe the 2 could see some synergy there. And along with the next card we're going to take a look at, I think that could also find a home in a Tigger deck. And that is Heffalumps and Woozles, which was just revealed today.
Yeah, so this is an Emerald song. It is a 2-cost inkable song for that matter, and it says chosen opposing character can't quest during their next turn, and then you also get to draw a card. So this is pretty cool in the fact that it slows your opponent down in case they wanted to quest with something, and so this might be pretty good against aggro. It also helps you draw cards so that you find more answers that you can use depending on the current board state. And right away I kind of think this is another 2-cost song that Ursula, Deceiver of All, could sing. So she could make 2 characters not be able to quest and draw you 2 cards if you wanted to do that.
It seems like this effect
pretty flexible.
Sometimes whether it's if you're in a tight race lore-wise and you're both trying to close it out, it could be impactful to say a character can't quest. Also, it's kind of like Reckless in that regard, but they don't have to challenge in this case. But again, you could use this on something like Hiram, so he can't quest, which means he can't use his ability to destroy an item and draw 2. And there's other characters like that have on-quest effects, like Tamatoa as well, that can get an item back from the discard. So it's really a flexible card, and then it at least replaces itself.
I think if you're against like a control deck that wants to fight for the board early, like a deck that probably doesn't care about questing very much, then this card probably loses a lot of its value. So maybe you just ink it in that case. But in the right matchup at the right time, I think this could definitely buy you some time to kind of help you win the race.
And I wonder
keep drawing cards.
In like a deck where you care about playing a lot of actions, you might also be running the Emerald card Airfoil, which lets you exert it to draw a card if you've played at least 2 actions in the turn. So this one already replaces itself. So if you play just one more action on top of this one, then you're drawing an additional card off the Airfoil, and you can kind of keep that engine running. And if you're, let's say, casting at least 2 or more in a turn, the Tigger could be questing for a lot more that we just looked at as just one example. So something to potentially keep an eye on, and I'm going to be excited to see just other different deck ideas that come to mind with the more cards that continue to be revealed from the new set that is not too far away at this point.
Yeah, I think we're getting close now, and there's still a lot left to be seen, and I think they're saving a lot of really cool stuff, to surprise us with later. And it's always fun just kind of as we get towards the end of reveal season, and then you can start, planning what types of decks you might want to play in the next set.
Definitely got some ideas already, but for now, thank you for tuning in. We should be back next week with a video recapping, our latest adventures in the realm of Lorcana.
And good luck to all of you who are competing in set champs this upcoming weekend and through the rest of the month.
Yes. Happy questing.